The Medieval Gardener, a day in the Physic garden. Dawn at the monastery. The first light of dawn breaks over the stone walls of St. Benedict's monastery, somewhere in rural England in the year 1348. Brother Thomas awakens not to an alarm, but to the distant sound of the monastery bell tolling prime, the first of the 8 daily prayer services that structure monastic life. The bell's resonance carries across the cloister, mingling with the morning song of blackbirds in the apple trees. Brother Thomas is not a priest, nor a scholar bent over illuminated manuscripts. He is a gardener, one of the lay brothers whose hands work the earth rather than the quill. His small cell is sparse: a straw mattress, a woolen blanket, and a wooden cross on the wall. The stone floor is cold beneath his bare feet as he rises, pulling on his tunic of undyed wool, the color of oatmeal, which marks his status as a working brother rather than a choir monk. After splashing his face with cold water from a basin, Thomas makes his way through the dim corridors to the chapel for prime. The service is brief in the grey morning light, Latin prayers echoing off stone walls. Though he cannot read, Thomas knows the rhythms of the liturgy by heart, his lips moving in silent devotion. Monasteries in medieval Europe operated on a horarium, a strict daily schedule organized around the divine office, the cycle of prayers that divided day and night into sacred segments. Following the service, the brothers file into the refectory for their morning meal. Breakfast is simple: a piece of coarse brown bread made from muslin, a mixture of wheat and rye flour, and a cup of weak ale. In medieval times, water was often unsafe to drink, so even monks consumed ale or wine with most meals, though theirs was deliberately brewed to be low in alcohol, a small beer meant for sustenance rather than intoxication. Thomas eats in silence, as the rule of St. Benedict prescribes quiet during meals while one brother reads aloud from Scripture. As the sun climbs higher, painting the morning mist with gold, Thomas finally approaches his domain, the Physic garden. This walled enclosure sits adjacent to the Infirmary, a deliberate placement since the garden's purpose is medicinal. Physic gardens, also called herbularia or herbaria, were essential features of medieval monasteries, serving as living pharmacies where monks cultivated plants for treating the sick. Thomas unlatches the wooden gate and steps into his sanctuary. The garden is laid out in a series of raised rectangular beds, each bordered by woven wattle fencing made from willow branches. This design isn't merely aesthetic. Raised beds provide better drainage and prevent patients recovering in the nearby infirmary from accidentally trampling medicinal plants. The beds are arranged in a cruciform pattern, forming a cross when viewed from above, a subtle reminder that healing, like all monastic work, is an act of devotion. Thomas begins his morning rounds, his experienced eye scanning each bed for signs of disease, pest damage, or water stress. Medieval gardeners worked without the benefit of modern tools or knowledge, relying instead on centuries of accumulated observation passed down through practical experience and texts like the Herbarium of Apuleius or De Materia Medica by Dioscorides, which had been copied and recopied by monastery scribes. The morning dew still clings to the leaves, and Thomas knows this is the best time for certain tasks. In one bed, feverfew grows with its small, daisy-like flowers. This herb is used for headaches and to reduce fever, its name derived from the Latin febrifugia, meaning fever reducer. He makes a mental note that it will soon be ready for harvesting. In another bed, St. John's wort displays its cheerful yellow flowers. Thomas has learned from the Infirmarian, Brother Anselm, that this plant must be harvested on St. John's Day, June 24th, when its medicinal properties are believed to be at their peak. Medieval herbalism blended practical observation with layers of religious symbolism and astrological timing. The belief that plants gathered at specific holy days or lunar phases possessed enhanced healing powers. Thomas retrieves his tools from the small shed at the garden's edge. His implements are simple but well maintained: a wooden-handled knife with an iron blade for cutting, a small hand fork for loosening soil, and several woven willow baskets for collecting herbs. Medieval gardeners did not have steel tools. Iron was expensive and precious, so tools were sharpened carefully and used for years, even decades. He also carries a length of cloth and a ceramic pot. The cloth will be used to protect delicate herbs from too much sun as they are transported to the drying shed, while the pot contains a mixture of water and vinegar for cleaning his hands between handling different plants, a practice the monks have learned prevents the mixing of plant essences and potential contamination. Thomas approaches the lavender bed, where purple spikes rise in fragrant profusion. Lavender, or lavandula in Latin, gets its name from lavare, meaning to wash, as Romans used it in their bath water. In the monastery, it serves multiple purposes: strewn on floors to freshen rooms, tucked into linen chests to repel moths, and most importantly, used medicinally for its calming properties. The Medieval Gardener, a day in the Physic garden. Dawn at the monastery. The first light of dawn breaks over the stone walls of St. Benedict's Monastery, somewhere in rural England in the year 1348. Brother Thomas awakens not to an alarm, but to the distant sound of the monastery bell tolling prime, the first of the 8 daily prayer services that structure monastic life. The bell's resonance carries across the cloister, mingling with the morning song of blackbirds in the apple trees. Brother Thomas is not a priest, nor a scholar bent over illuminated manuscripts. He is a gardener, one of the lay brothers whose hands work the earth rather than the quill. His small cell is sparse: a straw mattress, a woolen blanket, and a wooden cross on the wall. The stone floor is cold beneath his bare feet as he rises, pulling on his tunic of undyed wool, the color of oatmeal, which marks his status as a working brother rather than a choir monk. After splashing his face with cold water from a basin, Thomas makes his way through the dim corridors to the chapel for prime. The service is brief in the gray morning light, Latin prayers echoing off stone walls. Though he cannot read, Thomas knows the rhythms of the liturgy by heart, his lips moving in silent devotion. Monasteries in medieval Europe operated on a horarium, a strict daily schedule organized around the divine office, the cycle of prayers that divided day and night into sacred segments. Following the service, the brothers file into the refectory for their morning meal. Breakfast is simple: a piece of coarse brown bread made from muslin, a mixture of wheat and rye flour, and a cup of weak ale. In medieval times, water was often unsafe to drink, so even monks consumed ale or wine with most meals, though theirs was deliberately brewed to be low in alcohol, a small beer meant for sustenance rather than intoxication. Thomas eats in silence, as the rule of St. Benedict prescribes quiet during meals while one brother reads aloud from Scripture. As the sun climbs higher, painting the morning mist with gold, Thomas finally approaches his domain, the Physic garden. This walled enclosure sits adjacent to the infirmary, a deliberate placement since the garden's purpose is medicinal. Physic gardens, also called herbularia or herbaria, were essential features of medieval monasteries, serving as living pharmacies where monks cultivated plants for treating the sick. Thomas unlatches the wooden gate and steps into his sanctuary. The garden is laid out in a series of raised rectangular beds, each bordered by woven wattle fencing made from willow branches. This design isn't merely aesthetic. Raised beds provide better drainage and prevent patients recovering in the nearby infirmary from accidentally trampling medicinal plants. The beds are arranged in a cruciform pattern, forming a cross when viewed from above, a subtle reminder that healing, like all monastic work, is an act of devotion. Thomas begins his morning rounds, his experienced eye scanning each bed for signs of disease, pest damage, or water stress. Medieval gardeners worked without the benefit of modern tools or knowledge, relying instead on centuries of accumulated observation passed down through practical experience and texts like the Herbarium of Apuleius or De Materia Medica by Dioscorides, which had been copied and recopied by monastery scribes. The morning dew still clings to the leaves, and Thomas knows this is the best time for certain tasks. In one bed, feverfew grows with its small, daisy-like flowers. This herb is used for headaches and to reduce fever, its name derived from the Latin febrifugia, meaning fever reducer. He makes a mental note that it will soon be ready for harvesting. In another bed, St. John's wort displays its cheerful yellow flowers. Thomas has learned from the Infirmarian, Brother Anselm, that this plant must be harvested on St. John's Day, June 24th, when its medicinal properties are believed to be at their peak. Medieval herbalism blended practical observation with layers of religious symbolism and astrological timing. The belief that plants gathered at specific holy days or lunar phases possessed enhanced healing powers. Thomas retrieves his tools from the small shed at the garden's edge. His implements are simple but well maintained: a wooden-handled knife with an iron blade for cutting, a small hand fork for loosening soil, and several woven willow baskets for collecting herbs. Medieval gardeners did not have steel tools. Iron was expensive and precious, so tools were sharpened carefully and used for years, even decades. He also carries a length of cloth and a ceramic pot. The cloth will be used to protect delicate herbs from too much sun as they are transported to the drying shed, while the pot contains a mixture of water and vinegar for cleaning his hands between handling different plants, a practice the monks have learned prevents the mixing of plant essences and potential contamination. Thomas approaches the lavender bed, where purple spikes rise in fragrant profusion. Lavender, or lavandula in Latin, gets its name from lavare, meaning to wash, as Romans used it in their bathwater. In the monastery, it serves multiple purposes: strewn on floors to freshen rooms, tucked into linen chests to repel moths, and most importantly, used medicinally for its calming properties. The peace of Thomas's work is gently interrupted by the creak of the garden gate. Brother Anselm, the infirmarian, enters carrying a small wooden box. He is an older man, his tonsure, the shaved crown of hair marking him as a cleric, now surrounded by a ring of white. Unlike Thomas's plain work tunic, Anselm wears the full black habit of a choir monk. "Good morning, Brother Thomas," Anselm says, his voice soft and warm. "I see you've begun with the lavender. Excellent timing. We've used the last of our stores from last summer. Thomas rises from his crouch, brushing bits of plant matter from his knees. Yes, brother. The plants are at their peak. I'll have the first bundles drying by terce. Terce, the third-hour prayer service, would be held around mid-morning, dividing Thomas's work-day into manageable segments marked by the rhythm of the divine office. Anselm opens his wooden box to reveal a collection of seeds, each type wrapped carefully in small cloth pouches. I've brought seeds for fennel and dill, he explains. We'll need to plant them soon if we want a harvest before autumn. Both are carminatives. They help expel wind from the stomach and ease digestive discomfort. This exchange represents how knowledge was transmitted in medieval monasteries. Books were rare and precious, and most lay brothers like Thomas could not read. Instead, learning happened through oral instruction and hands-on demonstration, with experienced monks teaching younger ones in an unbroken chain of knowledge stretching back generations. The monastery itself served as a repository of accumulated wisdom, preserved not just in manuscripts but in the living practices of its members. Anselm continues, the fennel should be planted in the bed near the south wall where it will receive full sun. Fennel is hot and dry in the 3rd degree, quite warming to the constitution. We use it for patients suffering from cold stomachs and weak digestion. As Anselm departs to attend terce, Thomas stands for a moment in the center of his garden, chamomile flowers cupped in his palms, the morning sun warming his shoulders. Around him, bees hum among the flowering herbs, another gift of the garden, as the monastery keeps hives nearby. The bees not only pollinate the plants but provide honey, which serves both as a sweetener and as a base for medicinal preparations, and beeswax for candles that light the chapel and infirmary. Thomas calculates the work ahead, finish harvesting the chamomile, begin drying both herbs in the shed, prepare the south bed for the fennel and dill seeds, check the water levels in the rain barrels, and weed the bed where comfrey grows. Comfrey, with its deep purple bell-shaped flowers, is crucial for treating broken bones and wounds. Its Latin name, symphytum, means to unite. Thomas carries his baskets, now heavy with lavender bundles and loose chamomile flowers, to the drying shed at the garden's northern corner. This small wooden structure has slatted walls that allow air to circulate while keeping out direct sunlight and rain. The shed's design is crucial. Herbs must dry in darkness or dim light to preserve their color and potency, as strong sunlight can break down the very compounds that make them medicinally effective. Inside, the shed is fragrant with the ghosts of previous harvests. Bundles of herbs from earlier in the season still hang from the rafters, pennyroyal for purifying the blood, hyssop for lung complaints, and rue for eyesight. The air is warm but not hot, dry but not desiccating, the perfect environment created by careful positioning of the structure to catch prevailing breezes while avoiding moisture from the nearby stream. Thomas ties the lavender bundles to lengths of twine strung across the shed, spacing them so air can move freely around each bundle. Proper drying is an art. Too fast and the herbs become brittle and lose their oils. Too slow and they may develop mold or mildew. Medieval gardeners learned to judge drying time by touch and scent, knowing that lavender typically needs 7 to 10 days in good conditions, while the delicate chamomile flowers require only 3 to 4 days. For the chamomile, Thomas uses a different method. He spreads the flower heads in a single layer on wooden drying racks covered with linen cloth. These racks stack vertically, allowing him to dry large quantities in a small space. The linen is important. It's breathable, unlike the oiled cloth or parchment that might be used for other purposes. Each piece of linen has been washed multiple times to remove any residual oils or dirt that might contaminate the herbs. As he works, Thomas gently turns each flower head so they don't rest flat against the cloth. This simple action prevents the formation of flat spots where moisture might linger and spoil the batch. In medieval herb preparation, attention to such small details often meant the difference between a remedy that worked and one that had lost its virtue. The monastery bell rings out, calling the brothers to terse. Thomas brushes the remaining plant matter from his hands and tunic, then makes his way back through the garden gate toward the chapel. The discipline of the Herarium means that no matter how pressing the garden work, the divine office takes precedence. This rhythm, work, prayer, structures not just the day but the very consciousness of monastic life, preventing any single task from consuming a brother's entire attention and always redirecting the mind toward God. The chapel is cool and shadowed, a stark contrast to the bright garden. Thomas takes his place among the other lay brothers in the rear of the nave, while the choir monks occupy the stalls closer to the altar. The service is brief, perhaps 15 minutes, filled with psalms and responses. Thomas doesn't understand all the Latin words, but the cadence is familiar and comforting, like the rhythm of hoeing or the pattern of seasons in the garden. After terce, Thomas returns to the garden with a different purpose. Before planting the fennel and dill seeds, he must prepare the soil. He walks to the far corner of the garden where the monastery's compost heap sits, a mounded pile of kitchen scraps, animal manure, ash from the kitchen fires, and plant waste from the garden itself. Composting was essential to medieval agriculture and gardening, though monks would not have used that specific term. They knew from experience that rotted organic matter enriched the soil and produced better crops, understanding it as a kind of alchemy where base materials transformed into black gold. The monastery's compost system was sophisticated, multiple piles in different stages of decomposition, allowing for a continuous supply of finished compost throughout the growing season. Thomas uses a wooden pitchfork to turn the nearest pile, aerating it. The heap steams slightly in the morning air, a sign that decomposition is occurring properly. The smell is earthy and rich, not unpleasant to someone accustomed to it. Mixed into the compost, Thomas can see eggshells from the kitchen, straw from the stables, ash that will provide potash to nourish plants, and the green waste from previous garden harvests. Everything in the monastery had its use. Waste was a concept that barely existed when every scrap could be transformed into something valuable. With a woven basket filled with finished compost, dark, crumbly, and smelling of forest floor, Thomas approaches the south-facing bed where the fennel and dill will be planted. This bed is currently occupied by the remnants of early spring lettuce that has bolted in the summer heat. Thomas pulls up these spent plants, shaking the soil from their roots back into the bed. The lettuce will go onto the compost heap, continuing the cycle. Medieval gardeners practiced what we might call crop rotation, though they understood it through observation rather than scientific theory. They knew that growing the same plants in the same location year after year led to poor harvests and sickly plants. By rotating crops and adding compost, they maintained soil fertility without understanding the nitrogen cycles or nutrient depletion that modern science has revealed. Thomas works the compost into the soil with his hand fork, breaking up clumps and mixing the dark amendment thoroughly into the lighter garden earth. The soil in the Physic garden is superior to the heavy clay that dominates much of the monastery's farmland. Centuries of compost addition have transformed it into a loose, friable medium that crumbles easily in the hand. This tilth, as gardeners call the soil's texture and structure, is one of Thomas's sources of quiet pride. As he prepares to plant the fennel seeds, Thomas recalls another piece of Brother Anselm's instruction. Fennel should not be planted near the bed where coriander grows, as the two plants are enemies and will harm each other's growth. Similarly, dill and fennel should be kept apart despite being related plants. This knowledge of companion planting, which plants help or hinder each other, was accumulated over generations of observation. The medieval understanding was often framed in terms of sympathies and antipathies, the idea that plants, like people, could be friends or foes. Modern science has revealed mechanisms behind some of these observations: allelopathy, where plants release chemicals that inhibit competitors or competition for specific nutrients. But the practical outcome was the same. Thomas knows where each herb should grow for optimal health, even if he explains it through the language of harmony and discord rather than chemistry. Thomas opens the small cloth pouch containing the fennel seeds. They are tiny, elongated, and ridged, a pale greenish-brown. He creates shallow drills in the prepared soil using his finger, spacing them about a hand's width apart. The depth is critical. Too deep and the seeds won't have the strength to reach sunlight. Too shallow and they'll dry out or be eaten by birds. He sows the seeds sparingly, knowing that fennel germinates readily and that crowded seedlings will compete with each other. Medieval gardeners couldn't simply purchase more seeds if a planting failed. Each seed was precious, often saved from the previous year's harvest in a careful cycle of cultivation that connected each growing season to the last and the next. This economy of resources shaped every decision Thomas made. Nothing wasted, everything used to its fullest potential. After covering the seeds with a light layer of soil and patting it down gently, Thomas uses a wooden watering can, really a bucket with holes punched in the bottom, to give the bed a gentle soaking. The water comes from rain barrels positioned at the corners of the drying shed, collecting runoff from the roof. Rainwater was preferred for young seedlings over well water, which could be too cold or too mineral-rich. The medieval gardener's knowledge was intensely practical, based on what worked rather than why it worked. Before the midday prayers, Thomas has time for one more task. He moves to the bed where comfrey grows, its broad, hairy leaves creating a dense canopy. Comfrey is one of the most valued plants in the Physic garden. Its deep taproot, which can extend 5 feet or more into the earth, pulls up minerals from far below the surface, making it exceptionally nutritious both as a plant medicine and as a compost accelerator when its leaves are added to the heap. Between the comfrey plants, Thomas spots the telltale leaves of common groundsel, a persistent weed that seems to appear overnight. He kneels and begins pulling the groundsel carefully, ensuring he removes the entire root system. Medieval gardeners recognized that some weeds, if pulled carelessly, would simply regrow from root fragments left behind. The work is meditative, rhythmic, grasp, pull, shake off the soil, toss onto the waste pile. Grasp, pull, shake, toss. Interestingly, groundsel itself has medicinal uses. Brother Anselm has mentioned it can be made into a poultice for skin inflammations, but in the Physic garden it competes with more valuable plants and must be removed. This illustrates a principle Thomas has learned: context matters. A plant that is medicine in one situation becomes a weed in another, depending on where it grows and what the gardener intends. As Thomas works among the comfrey, he notices a young novice, Brother Martin, peering through the garden gate with obvious curiosity. Thomas waves him in. He remembers being new to the monastery himself, overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all, and is glad to share his knowledge. "Brother Thomas," Martin asks shyly, "how do you know which plants heal which ailments? There are so many." Thomas wipes his hands on his tunic and gestures for Martin to kneel beside him. He points to the comfrey. "See how the leaves are shaped? Rough and strong, like bone? And when you break the root, it oozes a sticky substance, like the body's natural fluids that knit wounds together. God has given us signs in the plants themselves to show us their uses. This is the doctrine of signatures, a belief widespread in medieval herbalism that God marked plants with visual clues to their medicinal purposes. A plant with yellow sap might treat jaundice, which yellows the skin. Walnuts, which resemble the brain, were thought to cure headaches. Lungwort, with its spotted leaves resembling diseased lungs, was used for respiratory ailments. While modern medicine has moved beyond this framework, it shaped how medieval people understood and remembered the vast pharmacopoeia of plants available to them. Thomas continues his instruction, glad for the company and the opportunity to pass on what he knows. Comfrey is called knitbone in the common tongue. He explains, using his knife to carefully cut a small piece of leaf. When Brother Anselm treats a broken bone, he makes a poultice of comfrey root and applies it to the site. The plant helps the bone to knit back together. We've seen it work many times. What Thomas doesn't know, but what centuries of use have validated, is that comfrey contains allantoin, a compound that indeed promotes cell regeneration. The medieval explanation involves the plant's hot and dry qualities balancing the cold and moist condition of a wound, but the practical application is sound. We also use comfrey for sprains, bruises, and cuts that won't close properly, Thomas adds. He shows Martin how to identify true comfrey from its cousin, Russian comfrey, by the way the leaves descend down the stem in wings. Such precise identification is crucial. Using the wrong plant could mean the difference between healing and harm, or at least between success and ineffectiveness. Brother Martin asks another question. "But Brother Thomas, how do you remember it all? Which plants for which ailments, when to harvest, how to prepare them?" Thomas smiles. "The garden itself is my book," he says. "Each plant is a page, and by tending them day after day, season after season, I learn to read their language." Brother Anselm has his manuscripts in the scriptorium, but I have living texts here in the soil. This metaphor reflects a deeper truth about medieval knowledge systems. While the monastery scriptorium contained precious manuscripts, copied medical texts from ancient authorities like Galen and Dioscorides, the practical knowledge in Thomas's head, accumulated through direct experience and oral teaching, was equally valuable. Books could be destroyed by fire, water, or war, but knowledge embedded in practice and passed from person to person formed a resilient web of wisdom. In many ways, the Physic garden functioned as a three-dimensional encyclopedia of botanical medicine. The spatial arrangement itself was a mnemonic device. Thomas knew that wound healing herbs occupied the eastern beds, digestive herbs the southern beds where they received warmth, and cooling herbs for fevers the shadier northern beds. The garden's layout encoded knowledge in a way that aided memory and daily practice. The bell rings for sext, the 6th hour, signaling midday prayers and the main meal. Thomas helps Brother Martin to his feet. The young man's knees are not yet accustomed to kneeling on hard earth, and they walk together toward the chapel. "Will you return to the garden after dinner?" Martin asks. "For a short while," Thomas replies. "But the afternoon is for rest during summer months. The heat makes heavy labor dangerous, and Brother Anselm insists we follow the natural rhythms of the day. We work hard in the cool morning, rest when the sun is highest, and resume lighter tasks as it descends." This practice of midday rest, common in medieval monasteries and throughout Mediterranean cultures, reflects an understanding of the body's needs and the dangers of heat exhaustion. Monastic life, despite its reputation for austerity, actually incorporated considerable wisdom about human limitations and the importance of rest. The rule of Saint Benedict explicitly provided for adequate sleep, food, and rest periods, viewing the body as a gift from God to be stewarded wisely rather than punished. The refectory is filled with the sounds of brothers taking their places on the long wooden benches. The tables are set simply: wooden bowls, spoons carved from horn, cups for ale. At the head table sit the abbot and the senior monks. The lay brothers occupy tables nearer the kitchen. Today's meal is substantial: a pottage of beans, onions, and barley, thick and steaming. There's also fresh bread, better than the morning's muslin, made with a higher proportion of wheat, and a piece of hard cheese about the size of 2 fingers. A small bowl contains wild strawberries gathered by some of the brothers from the woods beyond the monastery walls, a seasonal treat that won't last long. As the brothers eat in silence, one of the choir monks stands at a lectern and reads aloud from the lives of the saints. His voice echoes off the stone walls, telling of Saint Fiacre, the patron saint of gardeners, who was given land in France by a bishop and told he could claim as much as he could entrench in a single day. With his staff, Fiacre miraculously marked out a vast garden, which became famous for its healing herbs and vegetables that fed the poor. Thomas listens as he eats, finding comfort in the story. Saint Fiacre understood the sacred nature of growing things, the way gardens could be acts of devotion and service. In his own humble way, Thomas feels connected to that tradition. Each plant he tends, each herb he harvests, is a prayer made tangible. After the meal, there is a brief period of free time before the mandatory rest period. Some brothers walk in the cloister, others sit quietly in meditation. Thomas returns briefly to the garden to check on the newly planted fennel bed and to ensure the drying shed's door is properly secured. A sudden wind or curious animal could undo a morning's work. The garden is quiet in the midday heat. Even the bees seem less active. their humming reduced to a drowsy murmur. Thomas notices that the rain barrels are getting low. If it doesn't rain soon, he'll need to carry water from the well, a laborious task involving multiple trips with heavy buckets suspended from a shoulder yoke. After his brief check of the garden, Thomas makes his way to the dormitory for the prescribed rest period. The daughter, as it's called, is a long room with rows of simple straw mattresses separated by low wooden partitions that provide minimal privacy. During summer months, these rest periods are not merely suggestions but requirements. Brother Anselm has seen too many cases of heat sickness among laborers who pushed themselves too hard under the midday sun. Thomas lies on his mattress, his body grateful for the respite. Through the narrow window, he can hear the distant lowing of the monastery's cattle and the occasional bark of the dogs that guard the sheep. The monastery is largely self-sufficient, maintaining not just gardens but also fields of grain, orchards, fish ponds, livestock, and workshops for various crafts. This economic model, the manor system, allowed monasteries to function as independent communities, producing nearly everything they needed while also generating surplus goods for trade or charity. As he rests, Thomas's mind drifts over the afternoon's tasks. After none, the mid-afternoon prayer service, he plans to check the progress of the dill and fennel seedlings, which should begin showing their first true leaves within a week. He also needs to harvest some yarrow. Brother Anselm mentioned that several villagers have been suffering from summer fevers, and yarrow tea is excellent for inducing sweating to break a fever. The bell for none rouses Thomas from a light doze. The afternoon sun has shifted, and while still warm, the air has lost its oppressive midday intensity. After the brief prayer service, Thomas returns to his beloved garden, now dappled with the longer shadows of mid-afternoon. He heads to the bed where yarrow grows in abundant clusters. Yarrow, with its feathery leaves and flat-topped white flower clusters, is one of the most versatile herbs in the Physic garden. Its Latin name, Achillea millefolium, comes from the Greek hero Achilles, who according to legend used yarrow to treat his soldiers' wounds during the Trojan War. This connection to ancient medicine gives the plant an almost legendary status in Thomas's mind. Yarrow can be used fresh or dried, and for the current need, fever treatment, Thomas knows Brother Anselm will want it dried for tea. He cuts the flowering stems about halfway down the plant, ensuring that enough growth remains for the yarrow to produce a second flush of flowers later in the season. This practice of sustainable harvesting is essential when the garden must provide medicine throughout the entire year. As Thomas works, he reflects on something Brother Anselm taught him about the timing of treatments. Medieval medicine was deeply connected to astrology and the calendar, with certain treatments considered more effective when administered during specific lunar phases or astrological alignments. Yarrow, for instance, was traditionally gathered during the waxing moon when plants were believed to draw energy upward from their roots into their aerial parts, making the flowers and leaves most potent. While Thomas doesn't fully understand the celestial mechanics, he respects the tradition. The monastery keeps careful astronomical records, and Brother Anselm consults these when planning treatments for serious ailments. This integration of medicine, astronomy, and theology reflects the medieval understanding that all knowledge was interconnected, The same God who created the heavens also created the healing plants, and understanding one meant understanding the other. As Thomas moves through the garden, he notices several white butterflies fluttering around the bed where the monastery grows cabbage for the kitchen. These are cabbage white butterflies, and while beautiful, they are a gardener's challenge. The butterflies themselves are harmless, but they lay eggs on the undersides of cabbage leaves, and the resulting caterpillars can devastate a crop. Thomas inspects the cabbage leaves carefully, finding several clusters of tiny yellow eggs. He pinches these off between his fingers, a tedious but necessary task. Medieval pest control relied entirely on manual methods, handpicking, creating physical barriers, or encouraging natural predators. The monastery's gardens intentionally harbor birds, hedgehogs, and toads, all of which feed on garden pests. Some monasteries also practiced a curious ritual of cursing pests, formal ecclesiastical procedures where a monk would read scripture and pronounce anathema on the insects or rodents plaguing the crops. While this might seem like superstition, it reflects the medieval worldview where spiritual and material realms were deeply intertwined, and all creatures, even destructive ones, fell under God's dominion and the Church's authority. At the edge of the Physic garden, near the wall, stands an elder tree, not strictly part of the garden beds but nonetheless an important part of the medicinal landscape. Elder, known as the medicine chest of the common people, provides remedies throughout the year. In spring, its flowers make a tea for fevers and coughs. In autumn, its berries can be made into syrup for winter illnesses. The elder tree also holds special significance in folklore. Thomas has heard village tales that elder trees house protective spirits, and that one should always ask permission before cutting elder wood. While such beliefs exist in an uneasy relationship with church teaching, they persist, reflecting ancient pre-Christian reverence for certain trees. Brother Anselm, pragmatic as always, neither confirms nor denies such beliefs but treats the elder tree with obvious respect. Thomas gathers some of the elder's broad leaves, which Brother Anselm uses in making salves for bruises and swellings. The leaves must be used carefully. In large quantities they can be toxic, but applied externally in the right preparation, they reduce inflammation effectively. This dual nature of many medicinal plants, healing in correct doses, harmful in excess, is something Thomas has learned to respect deeply. With his basket now containing both yarrow and elder leaves, Thomas heads to the small work area adjacent to the drying shed. Here, under a simple roof open on three sides, stands a sturdy wooden table scarred by years of use. This is where herbs are processed before being taken to the infirmary. Brother Anselm has taught Thomas the difference between infusions and decoctions, two primary methods of extracting medicinal properties from plants. An infusion is made by pouring hot water over plant material and letting it steep, much like making tea. This method works well for delicate flowers, leaves, and aromatic herbs where heat might destroy volatile compounds. A decoction, by contrast, involves boiling tougher plant materials like roots, bark, or seeds for extended periods to extract their essences. Thomas begins preparing an infusion of the chamomile he harvested that morning. He takes a handful of the dried flowers, they're already crisp to the touch after just a few hours in the warm, dry shed, and places them in a ceramic pot. Water is heating over a small brazier kept burning for this purpose, fed with charcoal from the monastery's own kilns. The careful management of fire is crucial in a medieval monastery, where an uncontrolled flame could destroy buildings and threaten lives. As Thomas works, he considers the question of measurement. Modern medicine relies on precise doses and standardized preparations, but medieval herbalism operated differently. Brother Anselm speaks of a handful, or enough to cover with 2 fingers, or the amount that fills a walnut shell. These measurements are relative to the preparer's hand, which means they vary from person to person. Yet within this apparent imprecision lies practical wisdom. Many herbal remedies have wide therapeutic ranges, meaning the difference between an effective dose and a harmful dose is substantial. For the more dangerous plants, like foxglove or monkshood, Brother Anselm himself prepares the medicines with extreme care, using special measures and keeping detailed records of outcomes. For gentler herbs like chamomile or lavender, Thomas's handful is sufficient. This system also reflects the medieval understanding that healing is an art as much as a science, requiring judgment, experience, and attention to the individual patient. The same herb might be given in different strengths to a robust young man versus a frail elderly woman, to someone in the acute phase of illness versus someone recovering. The afternoon light is growing golden, that particular quality of late afternoon sunshine that makes everything appear burnished and warm. Soon the bell will ring for Vespers, the evening prayer service. After Vespers comes supper, a lighter meal than midday dinner, perhaps some bread, cheese, and vegetables from the garden. Thomas pours the hot water over the chamomile flowers, watching them float and swirl in the ceramic pot. The scent that rises is sweet and apple-like, immediately calming. He covers the pot with a wooden lid to trap the steam and the volatile oils within, letting the infusion steep. In 15 minutes, he'll strain it and store the liquid in a glazed pottery jar, labeled with a piece of parchment on which Brother Anselm will write Chamomile, for sleeping and digestion. As he waits for the infusion to steep, Thomas allows himself a moment of stillness. The garden around him hums with life, bees making their final rounds before evening, birds settling into roosts, the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. This rhythm of the garden mirrors the rhythm of the monastery itself, cycles within cycles, seasons within the year, prayers within the day, breaths within the body. The bell for Vespers rings out across the monastery grounds, its tone somehow different in the evening air, deeper, more resonant, calling the brothers to acknowledge the day's end. Thomas carefully strains his chamomile infusion through a piece of clean linen, catching the golden liquid in a glazed pottery jar. The spent flowers he'll add to the compost heap, continuing the cycle of use and renewal that characterizes all monastery work. In the chapel, the evening light streams through the narrow windows, painting stripes of gold and amber across the stone floor. Vespers is one of the longer prayer services, with extended psalm singing and readings. The monks' voices rise and fall in plainsong, the monophonic, unaccompanied sacred songs that have been the backbone of Christian liturgy for centuries. Thomas finds the chanting deeply soothing. Even though he cannot read the words, the musical patterns are as familiar to him as the seasons of planting. Plainsong, or Gregorian chant, follows specific modes and patterns that were believed to elevate the soul toward divine contemplation. Each psalm has its traditional melody, passed down through generations of monks. The acoustics of stone chapels were deliberately designed to enhance these chants, creating a sonic environment that seemed to lift earthly voices toward heaven. Supper in the refectory is simpler than the midday meal. Tonight there is dark rye bread, a piece of aged cheese with a sharp, nutty flavor, and a salad of fresh garden lettuces dressed with vinegar and a precious drop of oil. There's also a small serving of peas from the monastery's vegetable gardens, cooked simply with onion and herbs. Medieval monastic diet followed the rule of Saint Benedict, which forbade the eating of four-footed animals, though fish and poultry were permitted. This restriction meant that protein came primarily from dairy, eggs, fish, legumes, and nuts. The diet was largely plant-based by modern standards, though not by choice but by religious prescription. Interestingly, this diet, rich in vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, was probably healthier than the meat-heavy diet of the nobility. As the brothers eat, the reader continues from the lectern, now recounting agricultural advice from an ancient Roman text, Columella's De Re Rustica. The passage describes the proper time for pruning grapevines, advice that the monastery's vineyard keeper listens to with particular attention. This blending of practical agricultural knowledge with the spiritual life reflects the monastic ideal that all work is prayer, and all knowledge serves God's creation. After supper, Thomas has a final task before Compline, the last prayer service of the day. He carries the jar of chamomile infusion and a bundle of freshly cut yarrow to the infirmary, a separate building adjacent to the Physic garden. The infirmary is Brother Anselm's domain, where the sick and elderly brothers receive care. The infirmary is a long, well-lit room with beds arranged along both walls. Unlike the dormitory, each bed here has woolen curtains that can be drawn for privacy or warmth. At the far end stands a small altar where daily Mass is celebrated for those too ill to attend chapel. The air carries the mingled scents of herbs, beeswax candles, and the acrid tang of vinegar used for cleaning. Medieval monastic infirmaries were remarkably sophisticated for their time, representing some of the best medical care available in the period. They featured separate facilities for different types of ailments, systems for maintaining cleanliness, dedicated medical staff, and access to the monastery's pharmaceutical resources. The concept of the hospital, a place dedicated to healing the sick, evolved directly from these monastic infirmaries. Brother Anselm is tending to an elderly monk, Brother Cuthbert, who suffers from the joint pain that often comes with age. Anselm is applying a salve to Cuthbert's swollen knees, a mixture of comfrey, beeswax, and rendered animal fat that creates a smooth, penetrating ointment. The preparation of such salves is an art requiring careful heating to blend the ingredients without destroying the herb's properties. "Ah, Thomas," Anselm says without looking up from his work. "The chamomile infusion? Excellent." Young Brother Peter has been sleeping poorly since he arrived. The adjustment to monastic life weighs heavily on him. A cup of this before Compline should help settle his mind. Thomas sets down the jar and bundle. "And the yarrow for the village fevers?" "Yes, we'll need to prepare a strong decoction. The fever season is upon us." Anselm finishes his ministrations to Brother Cuthbert, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You've done well today, Thomas. The garden thrives under your care." As Anselm works, Thomas observes the various preparations arranged on the infirmary's shelves. There are ceramic jars labeled in Brother Anselm's careful script, each containing different remedies. Some hold dried herbs, others infused oils, still others the thick salves and ointments that Anselm prepares. How do you know which base to use? Thomas asks. Sometimes oil, sometimes animal fat, sometimes just water. Anselm smiles, pleased by the question. It depends on what we need the medicine to do. Water-based preparations, your infusions and decoctions, are good for internal use, for things that must be drunk. Oil-based preparations penetrate the skin more slowly but last longer, good for massage or for applying to unbroken skin. Salves with animal fat or beeswax are thicker still, creating a protective barrier while delivering herbs to wounds or very dry skin. This represents the medieval understanding of carriers or vehicles for medicine, the substances that deliver the active herbal ingredients to where they are needed. While the theoretical framework differed from modern pharmacology, the practical applications were sound. Anselm continues, we also consider the nature of the ailment. For hot, inflamed conditions, we might use a cooling oil like rose. For cold, stiff joints like Brother Cuthbert's, we use warming herbs in a penetrating base. Thomas notices that many jars contain herbs suspended in liquid, some in oil, others in what appears to be alcohol. The spirits of wine? He asks, pointing to a particularly clear liquid with rosemary sprigs floating within. Indeed, Anselm confirms. Wine, when distilled, produces a powerful preservative. Herbs kept in spirits of wine retain their properties for years, whereas dried herbs gradually lose potency. The distillation of wine is an art we learned from Arabic physicians, whose medical knowledge far surpasses our own in many ways. This acknowledgement reflects the reality of medieval medicine. Much of the most advanced medical knowledge came from Islamic scholars who had preserved and expanded upon Greek and Roman medical texts during Europe's early Middle Ages. Works by physicians like Avicenna and Rhazes were translated into Latin and studied in monasteries, bringing new techniques and understanding. The use of distilled alcohol as a preservative and solvent for medicines was one such innovation. Anselm opens a large wooden chest bound with iron, revealing compartments filled with more exotic and precious medicinal substances. Thomas glimpses packets of imported spices, cinnamon bark for digestive troubles, black pepper for the cold diseases of winter, ginger root for nausea. There are also small quantities of minerals, sulfur for skin conditions, alum for stanching bleeding. These we use sparingly, Anselm explains, both because they are costly, purchased from traveling merchants who bring them from distant lands, and because they are powerful. Local herbs serve for most ailments, but sometimes we need stronger remedies. This medicine chest represents the global nature of medieval trade and the monastery's connection to wider commercial networks. Spices traveled along the Silk Road from Asia, passing through countless hands before reaching a remote English monastery. Their expense meant they were reserved for serious conditions or wealthy patients who could afford to pay for such treatments. The light outside the infirmary windows is fading to purple dusk. Soon the bell will ring for Compline, the final prayer service before the great silence begins, the period from Compline until prime the next morning when monks observe strict silence, speaking only in cases of emergency. Brother Anselm prepares a cup of the chamomile infusion for young Brother Peter, adding a small spoonful of honey to make it more palatable. Chamomile is gentle, he tells Thomas, but it works reliably. For nervous conditions, disturbed sleep, anxious digestion, it soothes without stupefying. Some herbs, like poppy or henbane, bring sleep but cloud the mind and can become dangerous if used too often. Chamomile you can use daily without harm. This distinction between gentle and strong remedies was crucial in medieval medicine. While powerful sedatives and painkillers existed, including preparations from opium poppies and various nightshade family plants, they were used cautiously, reserved for severe pain or serious conditions. The preference was always for the gentlest effective remedy, escalating only when necessary. The chapel is lit now by candles, their flames creating a warm, flickering glow that dances across the stone walls. Compline is the shortest of the daily offices but perhaps the most solemn, a time to examine one's conscience and seek forgiveness before sleep. The service includes the singing of the Nunc Dimittis, the Song of Simeon, and concludes with the Salve Regina, a hymn to the Virgin Mary sung in the gathering darkness. After the final prayers, the abbot sprinkles the assembled brothers with holy water, a ritual blessing for protection through the night hours. In medieval understanding, night was a dangerous time when evil spirits might prowl, and this blessing served as spiritual armor. The brothers then file out in silence, the Great Silence now in effect. The Great Silence was strictly observed in medieval monasteries. From Compline until after prime the next morning, no speech was permitted except in genuine emergencies such as fire, severe illness, or danger. This silence served multiple purposes. It provided rest for voices worn from chanting, created a contemplative atmosphere for night prayers, and symbolized the stillness of Christ in the tomb before the resurrection. Thomas makes his way through the darkened corridors to the dormitory, guided by a single candle in a horn lantern, a translucent cow horn scraped thin enough to allow light through while protecting the flame from drafts. Such lanterns were essential in monasteries where open flames posed constant danger to wooden structures and precious manuscripts. The dormitory is already settling into sleep. Some brothers lie still immediately, exhausted from physical labor. Others shift and turn, adjusting their bodies on the straw mattresses. A few elderly brothers snore softly, the sound oddly comforting in its familiarity. Medieval people generally slept in two segments, a first sleep lasting several hours, followed by a wakeful period in the middle of the night, then a second sleep until dawn. During the wakeful period, people might pray, tend to needs, or simply lie quietly in thought. Thomas lies on his mattress, pulling the woolen blanket up to his chin. Despite the summer season, stone buildings hold a chill at night. His body aches pleasantly from the day's labor, the good ache of muscles well used rather than the pain of injury. He thinks through tomorrow's tasks, dig the valerian root for Mother Elswith, check on the fennel and dill seedlings, harvest more lavender if the weather holds, perhaps start preparing the beds for autumn planting. Thomas has barely fallen into his first sleep when the bell rings for matins, the night office held around 2 hours after midnight. This is the longest of the prayer services, sometimes lasting over an hour, with extensive psalm singing and readings. Many lay brothers are excused from matins due to the demands of their physical labor, but Thomas likes to attend when he can. There's something profound about prayer in the deep of night when the rest of the world sleeps. The chapel is cold and dark save for candles at the altar. The brother's breath creates small clouds in the candlelight. The chanting seems different at this hour, more haunting, more otherworldly, as if the voices are reaching across the boundary between the earthly and divine realms. Matins includes readings from the Church Fathers, complex theological texts that Thomas doesn't fully understand but finds beautiful in their rhythm and solemnity. After Matins, the brothers return to bed for their second sleep. The practice of waking for night prayers was based on biblical precedents, the psalmist's declaration to rise at midnight to give thanks, and was seen as a way of maintaining constant prayer, ensuring that at every hour of day and night, somewhere in the Christian world, prayers were ascending to heaven. Thomas wakes to birdsong. The blackbirds and thrushes that nest in the monastery's apple trees are always first to greet the dawn. Even before the bell rings for Lauds, the morning prayer before prime, Thomas rises and splashes his face with cold water. Today he feels the pleasant anticipation of a gardener who knows his plants are thriving, his work is bearing fruit. Before heading to Lauds, Thomas steps briefly into the cloister garden, a smaller, ornamental garden separate from the Physic garden, designed for contemplation rather than production. Here, flowers grow primarily for beauty and for adorning the altar: roses, lilies, and the starred purple flowers of columbine. The cloister garden represents a different kind of sacred space, the Garden of Eden, paradise regained, where beauty itself is an offering to God. Medieval monasteries typically maintained several types of gardens: the Physic garden for medicines, the kitchen garden for food, the orchard for fruit, and the cloister garden for spiritual contemplation. Each served its purpose in the monastery's life, but all were understood as reflections of divine order, small attempts to recreate the perfect garden God gave to humanity before the fall. After prime and a quick breakfast of bread and small beer, Thomas gathers the tools he'll need for digging valerian root: a sturdy iron spade, a smaller hand fork for loosening soil around the roots, several cloth sacks for collecting the harvest, and a bucket of water for washing the roots before storage. Valerian is a tall plant with clusters of small pink or white flowers that bloom in summer, but it's the root system that holds medicinal value. The roots have a distinctive, pungent odor, earthy and somewhat unpleasant, though not unbearable. Interestingly, cats are attracted to valerian root much as they are to catnip, and Thomas has learned to store dried valerian in sealed containers lest the monastery's mouses develop an interest in the medicine stores. The best time to harvest valerian root is in autumn when the plant's energy has returned to the root system, but Brother Anselm's need for it now means Thomas will dig some of the older plants that have already flowered. He approaches the valerian bed with respect. This is destructive harvesting, unlike cutting aerial parts that allow the plant to regrow. Each root he takes means one less valerian plant, so he must ensure he leaves enough to produce seeds for the next generation. Thomas begins by cutting back the tall stems and foliage of the valerian plant he's selected, a robust specimen with thick stems indicating substantial root growth below. He sets these tops aside for the compost heap, then begins carefully digging around the plant in a wide circle, about a hand span from the stem. Root harvesting requires patience and care. Dig too close and you'll sever the roots you're trying to harvest. Dig too hastily and you'll break the delicate rootlets where much of the medicine resides. Thomas works the spade in gradually, loosening the soil, feeling for resistance that indicates root spread. Medieval gardeners had an intimate knowledge of plant root systems, developed through years of observation and hands-on work. As he digs deeper, the distinctive smell of valerian intensifies. The root system is extensive, a thick central taproot with numerous fibrous side roots spreading in all directions. This is a healthy plant, probably 5 or 6 years old. Thomas works his hand fork under the root mass, gently leveraging it upward while supporting the crown with his other hand. With a satisfying release, the entire root system comes free from the earth. Thomas carries the valerian root to the work area by the drying shed where he can clean it properly. Using water from the bucket, he washes away the clinging soil, revealing pale yellow roots with a gnarled, fibrous texture. Medieval herbalists believed that the more twisted and complex a root appeared, the more powerful its medicine, another aspect of the doctrine of signatures, where form suggested function. The cleaned roots must be chopped into smaller pieces before drying, as whole roots would take too long to dry properly and might rot from the inside. Thomas uses a sharp knife to cut the roots into sections about the length of his thumb, being careful not to lose the smaller rootlets that fall away during cutting. These pieces will be spread on drying racks, similar to how he processed the chamomile flowers. However, roots require much longer drying time. Valerian root might need 2 to 3 weeks in the drying shed before it's properly preserved. Once dried, the roots become even more pungent and are stored in sealed pottery jars until Brother Anselm needs them. As Thomas works, Brother Anselm appears, making his morning rounds to check on various herb preparations. He observes Thomas's technique with approval before speaking. Valerian is one of our most powerful herbs for nervous conditions, Anselm explains. The root calms the mind without clouding it, unlike poppy preparations. It eases anxious thoughts, helps those who cannot sleep due to worry, and reduces the trembling that comes with extreme nervousness. Anselm picks up a piece of the fresh root, examining it. We prepare it as a decoction. The root must be boiled to extract its virtues. A cup before bed, sweetened with honey to mask the bitter taste, brings peaceful sleep. For Mother Elswith, who suffers with constant worry since her husband died, I'll prepare a stronger dose she can take 3 times daily. This represents the medieval practice of individualizing treatment based on the patient's specific situation, constitution, and symptoms. While the theoretical framework of humor guided general approaches, skilled practitioners like Brother Anselm also considered personal circumstances, emotional states, and individual responses to medicines. With the valerian roots cleaned and set to dry, Thomas turns his attention to the beds where he planted fennel and dill several days ago. The morning sun is warm on his back as he kneels beside the south-facing bed, examining the soil surface for the first signs of germination. Their tiny green shoots are just breaking through the soil, their distinctive feathery cotyledons emerging. Thomas feels a familiar surge of satisfaction. Each successful germination is a small miracle, the transformation of a dormant seed into living, growing plant. In medieval understanding, this was literally the breath of God animating creation, the same divine force that gave life to Adam from clay. He notes that germination is uneven, Some seeds sprouted quickly while others lagged behind. This is normal with direct sown seeds, which face variable conditions in the soil. Thomas knows he'll need to thin the seedlings once they're larger, removing weaker plants to give the strongest ones room to flourish. These thinnings won't go to waste. Young fennel and dill greens are delicious in the monastery kitchen, adding bright, anise-like flavor to salads and fish dishes. Brother Anselm has taught Thomas to recognize plant families by their characteristics, a sophisticated understanding for someone who cannot read botanical texts. Fennel, dill, coriander, caraway, and anise all belong to the same family, which medieval herbalists called the umbellifers for their umbrella-shaped flower clusters. Modern botany calls them apiaceae, but the observational knowledge is the same. These plants share certain features: hollow stems, feathery or divided leaves, flowers arranged in flat or rounded clusters called umbels, and aromatic seeds. They also share some medicinal properties. Most are carminatives that ease digestive discomfort by expelling gas and reducing bloating. Understanding plant families allowed medieval herbalists to make educated guesses about new or unfamiliar plants based on their structural similarities to known medicines. However, this family also includes some of the most poisonous plants known, including hemlock and water dropwort. Thomas has learned to be extremely cautious with wild umbellifers, never harvesting them from the countryside unless he's absolutely certain of identification. Brother Anselm has shown him preserved specimens of hemlock, with its purple-spotted stems and mouse-like odor, warning that even touching it excessively can cause illness. As Thomas works, he hears the monastery gate creak open and voices in the courtyard. Shortly, Brother Martin appears, leading an old woman, Mother Elswith herself, into the garden. She walks slowly, leaning on a staff, her face creased with worry lines. "Brother Thomas," Martin calls softly, "Mother Elswith wished to speak with you about the garden." Thomas rises, brushing soil from his knees, and approaches respectfully. In medieval society, age commanded respect, and though Mother Elswith is a peasant and Thomas a monk, he treats her with the courtesy due to her years. "Good mother," Thomas says, "how may I serve you?" Elswither's hands tremble slightly as she speaks. "The brother Infirmarian says you've dug valerian for my nerves. I wanted to thank you, and—" She hesitates. "I've brought eggs from my hens as payment." This exchange illustrates the medieval economy of exchange that existed between monasteries and their surrounding communities. While monasteries provided medical care as Christian charity, recipients often brought what they could in gratitude: eggs, cheese, labor, prayers. This system of reciprocal obligation bound communities together in webs of mutual support and indebtedness. Thomas accepts the eggs gratefully. They'll go to the monastery kitchen and supplement the brother's diet. The valerian will help, he assures her. Brother Anselm will prepare it properly. But there are also things you might do yourself. He leads Mother Elswith to the lavender bed. This plant you surely know, lavender. If you can obtain some, either dried or fresh, place it beneath your pillow or in a small cloth bag near your bed. The scent alone can calm troubled thoughts and ease the path to sleep. Medieval monasteries often shared basic herbal knowledge with the communities around them, empowering people to help themselves with common ailments. While serious conditions required the infirmarian's expertise, simple remedies for sleeplessness, minor aches, or digestive upset could be prepared at home. This sharing of knowledge was seen as part of the monastery's educational mission. And Chamomile, Thomas continues, walking her to another bed, makes a gentle tea for worry and nervous stomach. The flowers, when dried, steeped in hot water with a bit of honey. It's safe to take daily and won't harm you even if you take too much, you'll simply make water more often. Mother Ellsworth touches the chamomile flowers gently, her trembling easing slightly just from being in the peaceful garden. It's like paradise here, she murmurs. So calm, so ordered. Thomas realizes that the garden itself, not just its medicines, has therapeutic value. The beauty, the fragrances, the orderliness, the connection to growing things, all of this soothes the spirit. Medieval monasteries understood this intuitively. Their gardens were designed not just for production but for contemplation and spiritual renewal. The concept of hortus conclusus, the enclosed garden, carried deep symbolic meaning in medieval Christianity. It represented the Virgin Mary's purity, the soul's sanctuary from worldly corruption, and paradise itself. Walking in such a garden was a form of prayer, a way of experiencing divine order and beauty made manifest in the natural world. You're welcome to sit here a while, if you wish, Thomas tells Mother Ellsworth. The bench by the elder tree catches the morning sun but isn't too warm. Many find peace in simply being among the plants. She accepts gratefully, settling onto the simple wooden bench. Thomas returns to his work but keeps her in his peripheral vision, ready to help if needed. This, too, is part of the monastery's ministry, providing sanctuary, offering peace to troubled souls. As Thomas continues working near Mother Ellsworth's bench, the morning sun intensifies the garden's fragrances. The lavender releases its aromatic oils, the chamomile its apple-like sweetness, the mint its sharp freshness. Thomas has noticed that different times of day bring different scents. Morning coolness releases some fragrances, afternoon heat others. While Thomas doesn't know the chemistry of essential oils and volatile compounds, he understands experientially what modern aromatherapy has confirmed: scent affects mood and well-being. Medieval medicine recognized this, classifying scents as hot or cold, moist or dry, and using fragrant herbs not just internally but as fumigants, strewing herbs, and aromatic baths. The monastery's church is regularly fumigated with burning herbs, frankincense and myrrh during high holy days, but also local herbs like rosemary and lavender to purify the air and create an atmosphere conducive to prayer. The Physic garden provides many of these aromatic herbs, making it central to both medical and liturgical life. Near the bench where Mother Ellsworth rests grows a substantial rosemary bush, its needle-like leaves dark green and resinous. Rosemary is one of Thomas's favorite herbs, hardy, fragrant, and useful in countless ways. In the kitchen, it flavors roasted vegetables and fish. In medicine, it treats headaches, poor memory, and cold conditions. In church, its branches are burned as incense or carried in processions. Rosemary carries particular symbolic weight as the herb of remembrance. Medieval people wore sprigs of rosemary at funerals to remember the dead, at weddings to remember vows, and students tucked it into their caps when studying to aid memory. This association wasn't merely symbolic. Modern research has confirmed that rosemary's scent can indeed enhance cognitive function and memory retention. Thomas tells Mother Ellsworth about rosemary's memory-enhancing properties. Brother Anselm says that rosemary strengthens the memory and clears the mind of confusion. Some of our elder brothers take rosemary tea each morning to keep their wits sharp. The old woman nods, interested. My memory isn't what it was, she admits. I forget where I've put things, lose the thread of conversations. Rosemary can help, Thomas assures her. A sprig in your pocket to smell throughout the day, or tea made from the leaves. It's warming and stimulating, good for those whose minds grow foggy or whose bodies feel cold and sluggish. As the church bell begins to ring for terce, Thomas helps Mother Ellsworth to her feet. Before she leaves, he cuts a small bundle of lavender and rosemary for her, tying them with a piece of hemp twine. Take these with Brother Anselm's blessing and mine, he says. Place the lavender by your bed, carry the rosemary with you during the day. What Thomas is doing, giving blessed herbs to a parishioner, connects to an ancient practice where herbs themselves were seen as vehicles of divine grace. Many monasteries held annual ceremonies blessing herbs on the Feast of the Assumption, August 15th, creating Assumption bouquets that were kept in homes for protection and healing throughout the year. This blend of spiritual and material healing was characteristic of medieval medicine. The herbs worked through their natural properties, what we might call pharmacology, but were also understood as gifts from God, made more potent through prayer and blessing. Thomas may not be a priest authorized to give formal blessings, but his simple prayer over the herbs, "May these bring you peace and healing," carries the weight of monastic sanctity. After Mother Ellsworth departs with Brother Martin, Thomas stands for a moment in the quiet garden, reflecting on the interaction. This is why he does this work, not just to grow plants, but to help people, to ease suffering, to bring moments of peace to troubled souls. After terce, Thomas turns his attention to one of the garden's most important seasonal tasks, preparing beds for autumn planting. While summer still reigns, an experienced gardener thinks always one season ahead. In just a few weeks, he'll need to sow seeds for crops that will overwinter and provide early spring harvests. Thomas begins clearing a bed that held early lettuce and radishes, now long since harvested and eaten. He pulls the spent plant material and adds it to the compost heap, then begins turning the soil with his spade. The physical rhythm of digging is meditative: thrust, lift, turn, thrust, lift, turn. His body knows this work so well that his mind is free to wander and pray. Medieval agricultural wisdom dictated specific planting times based on both practical observation and traditional law. Garlic, for instance, must be planted on the shortest day, the winter solstice, and harvested on the longest, summer solstice. Onions should be planted when the moon is waxing, ensuring the bulbs swell large. While some of this was superstition, much was sound agricultural practice encoded in memorable seasonal markers. As Thomas works, he mentally catalogues what he'll plant in this bed: parsley for the kitchen and for kidney ailments, winter savory for digestive complaints, and perhaps some garlic for both culinary and medicinal use. Garlic was considered powerfully protective in medieval medicine. It fought infections, strengthened the blood, and was even thought to ward off pestilence. The monastery's need for herbs doesn't pause during winter. While many plants die back or become dormant, some hardy herbs continue to provide fresh medicine throughout the cold months. Rosemary remains evergreen, sage can be harvested year-round in mild winters, and carefully protected parsley will survive frost if covered with straw. Thomas also plans to dig and bring some herbs indoors for the winter. Potted rosemary can live in the warming house, a heated room where elderly or infirm brothers spend cold days. Not only will it provide fresh herbs, but its fragrance will freshen the air in enclosed winter quarters where many people living in close proximity can make the atmosphere close and stale. As Thomas turns the soil, he reflects on how the garden's work follows the great wheel of the year. Spring brings planting and the joy of new growth. Summer demands constant attention, watering, weeding, harvesting. Autumn requires preparation and preservation, securing the harvest against winter's scarcity. Winter offers rest and planning, time to repair tools and restore energy. This seasonal cycle mirrors the liturgical year that structures monastic life. Advent's anticipation, Christmas's celebration, Lent's austerity, Easter's triumph. All of these find echoes in the garden's rhythms. The medieval mind saw no separation between sacred and secular time. All of life participated in divine order, from the stars' movements to the humblest seed's germination. Brother Martin appears again, this time carrying a basket. Brother Thomas, the kitchen master sent me to gather some herbs for today's dinner. Might you teach me which ones to choose? Thomas smiles, setting down his spade. This is an important part of his role, passing knowledge to the next generation. Of course. What's being prepared? Fish from the pond, I believe, and some beans. Excellent. For fish, we'll want fennel. It pairs beautifully and aids in digesting rich foods. And for the beans, some summer savory. Thomas leads Martin to the appropriate beds, showing him how to identify each plant and how much to take. Always leave more than you take, Thomas instructs. Never strip a plant bare. If you take 1/3, the plant still has strength to continue growing. This way, the garden continues to provide throughout the season. This principle of sustainable harvest was fundamental to medieval gardening. Without the ability to simply buy more plants or seeds, gardeners had to work with what they had, ensuring their resources renewed themselves year after year. It was both practical necessity and spiritual practice, stewardship rather than exploitation. As Martin carefully cuts herbs under Thomas's watchful eye, Thomas reflects aloud, "Gardening is a kind of prayer, you know." When God placed Adam in Eden, his first command was to tend the garden. We continue that original work, partnering with God in caring for creation. This theological understanding of gardening was central to monastic life. Work wasn't separate from prayer, it was prayer made physical. The Latin motto labora ist orari, to work is to pray, captured this unity. Every hoe stroke, every seed planted, every herb harvested was an act of devotion. The garden teaches patience, Thomas continues. You cannot force a seed to grow faster by wishing it or worrying over it. You plant, you water, you wait, and trust that God provides the growth. This is faith made visible. Brother Martin listens intently, his basket now full of fragrant herbs. "I never thought of it that way," he admits. "I saw the garden only as a place that produces food and medicine." "It is that," Thomas agrees, "but it's also a Bible written in soil and sunlight. Each plant has lessons to teach if we're willing to learn." The bell for sext begins to ring, calling the brothers to the midday prayer. Thomas and Martin walk together toward the chapel, the younger man carrying his basket of herbs, both of them bearing the scent of the garden on their hands and clothes. As they walk, Thomas looks back at the Physic garden, his life's work, his daily prayer, his contribution to the monastery's mission of healing and service. The lavender sways gently in the breeze, the chamomile bobs its cheerful heads, the bees continue their eternal rounds. The garden will be here when he returns, requiring his care, offering its gifts, continuing its cycles. Later that evening, after Vespers and supper, Thomas takes a final walk through the garden in the long summer twilight. The air is cooling, carrying the concentrated fragrances of the herbs. This is his favorite time, when the day's work is done and he can simply be present with the plants he tends so carefully. He thinks about Mother Ellsworth, hopefully sleeping more peacefully with her valerian tincture and lavender pillow. He thinks about Brother Cuthbert, his joint pain eased by comfrey salve. He thinks about all the villagers who will benefit from the yarrow decoction, the feverfew tincture, the chamomile tea. Each plant in this garden represents a small act of mercy, a tiny rebellion against suffering. In a world where life is often harsh, brief, and painful, these herbs offer relief. They cannot cure all ills or prevent all suffering, but they can ease a headache, calm anxiety, help a broken bone knit, soothe an angry stomach. Thomas knows that he is not the first to tend this garden, nor will he be the last. Before him, other brothers worked this soil, learned these plants, passed on this knowledge. After him, others will come, perhaps Brother Martin among them, who will continue the work. This continuity, this passing down of knowledge through generations, is part of what gives Thomas's work meaning. He is a link in a chain stretching back to the monastery's founding and forward into an unknown future. The knowledge he carries, where each plant grows best, when to harvest, how to prepare medicines, will outlive him, serving people he will never meet. The medieval monastery was built on this principle of continuity. Individual monks came and went, but the community endured, its accumulated wisdom growing richer with each generation. The Physic garden, renewed each season yet fundamentally unchanged across centuries, embodied this permanence within change. As the light fades and stars begin to appear overhead, Thomas returns to the chapel for Compline one last time. Tomorrow will bring new tasks. There's always more work than one gardener can accomplish. But tonight, the garden rests, and so will he. The great silence falls over the monastery. In the dormitory, Thomas lies on his straw mattress, his body tired in the best way, his mind peaceful. Through the window, he can just make out the dark silhouette of the elder tree at the garden's edge, standing sentinel. He thinks of the seeds he planted, already beginning their mysterious transformation in the dark soil. He thinks of the lavender drying in the shed, preserving summer's essence for winter's darkness. He thinks of the endless cycle of growth and rest, harvest and renewal. At this moment, Brother Thomas is exactly where he belongs, a humble gardener in a small monastery, tending plants that heal bodies and souls, participating in the great work of creation, offering his life as a prayer of service. The garden sleeps. Thomas sleeps. Tomorrow, they will both wake and begin again. The end.